So I like to say, particularly with technology companies, product companies, I'd rather have a mediocre product and a world-class go-to-market team than a world-class product and a mediocre go-to-market team. I'll take, the former every time. Give me a world-class sales force, give me a world-class go-to-market strategy, and it's okay if the product isn't perfect. The other is typically a disaster.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another exciting episode of Founders Ascent, where we explore the ascent of founders across the world. I'm your co-host, BJ, joined as always with Gavin, and with our very special guest, Greg Pesik. I've thought for a while on how to give a proper introduction to Greg, and what I've settled on is the Superman of startups. He is the guy you call when you need to save a company, and he's done that repeatedly and continues to do that as advisor and board member to many startups and companies. In terms of background, he has an MBA from Cornell specializing in finance and hotel management. He's a SaaS startup investor with 3 exits and just an overall recognized leader for scaling companies. And I'm super excited to talk to you, Greg. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, BJ, and Gavin, for the opportunity.
Of course, yeah. We're going to hop straight into it, and let's talk a little about sort of your background and what brought you to where you are today. You've been involved with so many big names, KPMG, Accenture. Sort of, what did you want to do? What was the journey to get where you are today?
I think it's important to kind of start. I graduated undergrad in '86 and graduate school in '89. After I graduated undergrad, I was in hotel operations. You probably don't remember, but this was kind of the early advent of the internet, right? This was back in the late '80s, '90s. Internet really started to become one of the major drivers behind technology. And so what I saw from an operational perspective, particularly in the hotel arena, is that there was an untapped opportunity to use technology to enhance business operations. And that's when I got my MBA and really pivoted outside of being an operator to being someone who could identify the value of technology in specific business settings. That led me, after stints, as you mentioned, KPMG, and back then Anderson Consulting, to do a startup or join a startup in an area called revenue management, which is essentially the technology that controls ticket prices in the airlines. So you can see that they change minute by minute, et cetera. Well, that was a very new concept. I mean, I might argue that revenue management back then was really the first taste of truly advanced analytics, because you had to predict the future accurately in order to set prices for travel that was in that future. So it was really interesting to apply that kind of thinking to not just airlines, but hotels, car rental companies. Television advertising. Advertising is a perishable asset, right? Particularly like you talked about the Super Bowl. How do you price that? How do you optimize things of that nature? It can, you see it now, even though there's been quite a bit of backlash, but that came all the way into this kind of dynamic pricing at Wendy's. If you remember, I think it was about 2 months ago, they faced enormous backlash, right? So we exited that business in 2000, and then I became CEO of another company in travel. This one related to really the automation and optimization of reservations as it relates to groups. And it was, again, if you think about the time frame, early 2000, travel sites were popping up. Right. This is when, OTAs and online travel agencies really started their rise and dominance within the industry. So we went along on that. Hotels were excited to see a technology that can improve their operations, improve their revenue, improve their guest satisfaction with the experience. And ultimately, we built a global company out of that, opened offices in Singapore, London, Las Vegas, and then was acquired by a private equity company, Vista Equity. The nice thing about it is that that product is still around. We exited in 2014, but it still exists and is still being used in the same context of when we first designed it in 2000, 2001. So that was a really good experience. And I've kind of continued to do that, particularly in the area of early stage companies, sometimes even pre-seed companies, and kind of applying those lessons to the boards that I'm active on, right? What are the major obstacles, especially today, where there are just so many shiny objects out there that it's difficult for a buyer to say, yeah, I think I want to know more about that one, right? There's a new startup in a new area popping up every day. And depending on what vertical you're talking about or what horizontal function you're talking about, suddenly become kind of a compressed competitive environment because there's so many. So I think the struggle from the buyer side is certainly what is truly best in class, right? What's truly going to move the needle on the KPIs we have. And then similarly, from the startup perspective, can they truly define a moat that they can protect, that they own, to have that kind of competitive value that allows them to scale? So I spent a lot of my days, I don't spend a lot of my days saying, this is the database you need to be on, this is the cloud service you need to be on. In some sense, when I work with companies, I'm always going to assume their product's perfect, right? From there, it's been built, et cetera. But I do spend a lot of time in thinking, like, how do you navigate the noise, right? How do you make a compelling value proposition to a potential prospect? How do you play the David and Goliath game? Because when you're a startup trying to sell to a large corporation, the power dynamic is often, pretty screwy. And it can also be extremely expensive to pursue those kind of market opportunities just from a legal perspective and all that. So the other part of the day that I really think about is what does the organization need to look like, and how do they need to be incented to be focused on growth? So I like to say, particularly with technology companies, product companies, I'd rather have a mediocre product and a world-class go-to-market team than a world-class product and a mediocre go-to-market team. I'll take, the former every time. Give me a world-class sales force, give me a world-class go-to-market strategy, and it's okay if the product isn't perfect. The other is typically a disaster. Maybe that's too strong a word, but in the context of thinking about, if you think about revenue and sales as like fuel for a car, well, if you're not spending any money trying to get that fuel in the car, you're going nowhere, right? And I think what you see sometimes, particularly in early stage companies, they put a lot of money into product and very little money to go to market, or they have very money left to go to market. So I probably gives you a little bit of a background on how I approach things, et cetera.
Yeah. So I think you could argue that, I think you're right. And I think being able to spend more money getting out and making more deals, you could argue that you're getting more feedback in the process as well. And it's easy to sit here and speculate on what changes you need to make for your product before going out. But I think your feedback is going to be a lot better, and your changes are going to be better when you actually go out and start selling, getting real-time feedback on what the customers actually want, right?
Great point, Kevin. I couldn't agree more. And what you all, it's really funny. I remember doing a guest lecture at a entrepreneurship class at a graduate school.
Mm-hmm.
And I put up all the curriculums of all the top 10 business schools back then in the country. I had big posters of them, and I asked everyone to look at the curriculum and tell me what was missing. No, look on, there's accounting, there's, marketing, there's, operations, there's statistics. Yeah, I don't, that's it. It's really interesting back then that there was no degree, there was no classes on sales. If you think about a business school curriculum, a lot of it is finance, but it's historical. How do I analyze this, right? What's the PE ratio, right? What is, what's the appropriate, approach to R&D? But the thing that matters most, I used to say something like, there's only two ways to grow a company: sales, and I forget what the other thing is. Right? So, so I think it's, when, my philosophy in running businesses is you have to have a go-to-market oriented team. And when I say team, that's universal. That means everybody in the company should have some part of their incentive tied to net new growth, whether you're the office manager, whether you're, the network administrator, but you all have to be thinking, like, is this going to contribute to the future success of the business?
So you mentioned there's not being sales coursework, but how much of sales can you learn in a classroom versus just having to go out and get all those no's and get the door slammed in your face and learn it that way?
Sales is not just about, dialing for dollars, right? It has a lot to do with messaging. And in today's world, sales goes across multiple channels. It's not just the guy carrying the briefcase into the room, right? Many initial sales activities begin at the website. Then they convert over to, potential demo. What can you learn? You have to learn the process of sales, right? You have to understand if your personality is even built for sales. I think I think you see a lot of companies, what I call founder-led sales, where the founder is out there hitting the pavement, but often they're a technologist. They don't think like a salesperson does, right? They don't think in terms necessarily of, what are the two chess moves I have to make to navigate an organization? So what could you learn in school? You can see the structure of an enterprise. So who are stakeholders? Who are influencers? Who are decision makers? How do I build a coach within that organization to get the deal done? What are the appropriate how do I overcome objections, right? If you're trying to date a new girl and she says no, you come up with a whole bunch of ways to figure out how to overcome that objection, right? And so it's very similar in the context of sales. But there is, in my businesses, I spent a fortune on sales training. I spent and not just for salespeople. So my sales training involved customer service, engineers, finance. Everybody had to go through it. And when you get that kind of alignment, I think great things tend to happen.
Mm-hmm. And we've heard in the past that ways in which you could better sell your product or service are telling a story and being able to tell a good story, essentially telling the customer that how they feel, what they want is the way to go, rather than telling them what shiny features your product has. Is that true from your experience? And if it is, can you tell us what companies can do to help tell a better story?
Let me answer your first part of your question. Yes, absolutely. Storytelling is the most essential, and it's also the most natural way to talk to somebody. People, features and functions. I mean, to me, it's like, guys who buy stereos because it has lots of lights and buttons on the front of the amplifier, right? But they don't really, that's a different type of sale than when you're talking to someone. They want to know what the value to them is going to be. And if you can do that in the context of something like, hey, we put this solution into company Y, and they experienced the major changes in the key KPIs that they're measured against. They saw increased revenue. They saw increased, click-through rates. They see whatever it is, and the guest or the customer became more loyal, right? Things of that nature. There's a lot of stories that begin. Imagine if we had something that could alleviate 50% of your manual processes. What would that feel like to you? Would that be beneficial? And you're not even naming what the functionality is, right?
Yeah.
Right. So, when you put people in that state, it's like, how do I get there? And a lot of times it's what we call you phrasing instead of we. You will be able to do this. Not my solution does this. That's not transferring ownership, right? So you phrasing is incredibly key. One of the companies I feel really well connected to is Corporate Visions. They do a lot in this area of creating helping companies create a story. And so, for example, I think you've probably all been in sales presentation. And what's the first thing that has to get powered on before a sales presentation? PowerPoint, right?
Oh, yeah.
Now I want you to step back, and basically it's a crutch for the presenters, right? And you even have the worst ones where they just read everything on the PowerPoint, and it's full of text, and it's nonsense. Now go back, do the sales. One of the things we challenge ourselves when I was at my company is everyone had to break into groups and do a sales pitch. And then when they came in to start, I said, oh, by the way, there's no PowerPoint allowed. But you can use props. You can use Lego sets. You can use whatever you have. You can hand draw things on whiteboards, but no PowerPoint. And it's amazing how quickly people develop a story using things like that, right? And it's much more, it ties directly into the buyer's also emotion. They think you're talking to them then, right? You're not there as here's what the PowerPoint says, etc.
Yeah, and I almost think it works because it's like you're not just a name at that point. Like there's a story behind like why you were in that position, and I think we as humans are more likely to trust something or someone if we hear the story behind it, like what led to this moment of us two sitting in this room and you're trying to sell me something. Like I'm gonna trust you if you're able to give me context here as to why you're even here and what got you doing this. And I think that's why it works, because I'm just trying to put myself in the other person's shoes, the customer, just hearing this from somebody that's trying to sell me something. I think that's the stuff that would work.
So think about this, Gavin. Imagine you're the buyer and
Yeah.
you had 3 vendors come in to pitch something, and one of them came in with 2 slides and a Lego set, right? Now, after it's all over, which one of those 3 presentations do you think is most memorable? Not to say they're going to win, but do you think that buyer is going to go into the hallway and say, well, these guys came in, they showed us the architecture stack using Lego instead of, blocks of, primary colors on a PowerPoint, X, Y, and Z. And they use yarn to connect this and this to show the interfaces, right? And so it really does. I mean, you can, I'm sure you're in the back of your mind, you're envisioning what that might look like already, right?
Yeah, I am.
So that's that to me are all elements, and I think PJ, going back to your earlier question, wouldn't it be cool for people to be armed with some of that when they graduate, right? Because if you think of the route to kind of success, you being armed with that those kind of capabilities, or at least thinking about them, gives you a huge advantage over the swarms of people coming into the marketplace after graduation.
Right. And you mentioned one of the big troubles with startups is selling to these big companies, and that's a technical challenge and a legal challenge. But from a purely sales and messaging standpoint, sort of what do startups need to do to sell to Microsoft, Google, Amazon, whatever?
You need to find initially a sponsor. I mean, some people try and aim high and try and get the CEO. I mean, that's just not practical, right? You have to find a sponsor, but all the things still apply. Your sponsor, if you pitch to them in a way that uniquely presents an opportunity for them, they're going to help guide you through the process of the big bad, procurement, effort. They're going to find ultimately a business sponsor as well, a senior business sponsor that is going to help navigate this. So I've worked with sub $10 million companies that were able to close and do $1 million sales at large airlines, right? All through this kind of navigate, and that's I think we talked about that before. You're not selling to one person in a corporation. You're selling to a lot. You're selling to, and people even outside the organization sometimes serve as influencers, right? And so you kind of have to map that out. You have to have a sales strategy. You can't just spray and pray. You really have to think. And one of the things we used to do is we put all the executives and the managers who we needed to figure something out, and we tried to think, how are they incented? Right? If you're not incented by supply chain cost reduction, if you don't have an incentive there, and you're trying to sell supply chain cost, it sometimes a flyby, right? Especially if that person's trying to think of top line revenue. I'm not trying to think about costs. So you have to avoid the flyby. Do research. Get on their LinkedIn pages, figure out what makes them tick, right?
Yeah, and then do your best to contact as many of them as you can, or the ones that are worth contacting, because we've heard from another founder that oftentimes what these startups fail to do is they fail to contact multiple people within these large organizations when they're trying to make sales, and they have like one point of contact, and that point of contact leaves or moves positions, and then the deal it stops right in its tracks, right? So
yeah, you have to build relationships across the board. And I don't know, maybe I'm aging myself, but I think a lot of people are growing up without building non-electronic relationships, right? And then they get into a business situation where they're forced to break bread. They have to interact with it. And there's a discomfort level because that's not through COVID, everyone sold through Zoom, right? But at the end of the day, that you have to build compelling relationships with the right people to ensure that I think what you brought up, that your one sponsor suddenly leaves the company and you're at day zero again.
Yeah, exactly.
And you mentioned sort of making organizational changes to companies to support this vision of sales and making sure everything's going into growing the company and focusing on the go-to-market strategy. What specific ways? You mentioned compensation being tied to overall growth.
Yeah, so that's an incentive structure that I think is applicable to the entire business. Now, it doesn't, salespeople always have 50% of their incentive comp usually tied to a quota, right? A net new revenue growth, bookings, whatever it is. My argument is that everybody should have some piece, even if they're not directly responsible for growth. So if I'm the network engineer, 10% of my overall incentive compensation should at least be tied to that. So you can imagine when, we used to do these quarterly sales reviews, And again, everybody's in there, engineers, customer service, etc. And so when someone says, we're stalled here because we can't get this integration done, that ties directly then to the engineers who want to get the deal because part of their incentive is to do that. Organizationally, you find some, what I don't laugh about it, but I think it's concerning. You sometimes see companies just starting up, even sub 5 million, and suddenly they have a COO, a CEO, a CTO, a general counsel, but no EVP of sales, right? It's just weird. Everyone is quote unquote managing the business, but no one is singularly responsible for the forecast revenue and revenue growth of the business. And I do think there has to be accountability. If you're CEO and doing all the selling, it's very hard to kind of manage the business because unless you're selling $5 widgets, if you're selling complex deals, that's a full-time job, right?
True.
So yeah. Kind of the old metric. You need kind of 3 to 4 times quotas of what you need to achieve to run the business because you're only getting 25% of that quota, right? You're going to get losses. Now, could you manage if your target was 2 million in new revenues? Could you manage $8 million of opportunities while running a business in complex sales? Probably not.
Yeah. And so as you're getting into these companies and helping them grow, is that the main thing you're changing every time? It's more of a shift to focus on sales, or are there other components that you're helping with as well?
Well, all apart, certainly product market fit. The other, I think, key to that is really truly understanding your market. Have you guys seen a total available market presentation by someone who says, our total available market is 5 billion or, $10 billion? Yeah. Have you seen this? But the more important is what's your obtainable market? With all the things you have in place, current functionality, current go-to-market resources, what can you reasonably expect to execute? And then it suddenly becomes, this thing's getting a little smaller, but it's, sophisticated investors will see that and say, you haven't thought about who those targets are. Who are the right targets for this business? If you're trying to sell your product the first time and you want to sell it to Ford Motor Company, that's a pretty big leap. You may want to start with something smaller to get your product in. And I think to Gavin's really important point, that's where the learnings happen as well. So the other thing we work a lot on is what that available market is. And you can imagine what the next question probably comes from that. Well, what's our valuation? If we're raising money and we don't have revenue, well, what your evaluation is then built on the pipeline of opportunities and some sort of weight against that, times the current pricing model, and take whatever multiple you want. But that's I think that's another area where we work a lot. What should be my pre-money valuation? The other thing we talk a lot about is founders hate giving away equity, right?
Yeah.
So I want I'm going to keep 100% of it. I would say 90% of something small is a lot worse than 10% of something ginormous, right? So you have to be kind of thinking about, you own 90% of something that's worth 2 million that no one will buy. What are you going to do with it? It's not monetizable. I mean, you just have a lifestyle, but yeah, you have 90% of the business. I'd rather have 10% of $500 million valuation than that scenario. And so I think you have to be strategically sensitive. Founders have to think, okay, what am I really willing to get to the stage of growth that creates that value? And it's not about the percentage you own. about the value that you can get from that.
And you mentioned sort of the available market, and you also mentioned building a moat for startups and having a competitive advantage where you can keep your piece of the pie. How
Yeah.
How do companies do that? How have you seen that done?
So start with the following phrase of a sentence. We are the only ones who can fill in the blank, right? Only means you are the uniquely positioned to offer this capability to the marketplace. And that's the moat you have to defend. So for example, you could have a company that are the only ones who have a direct integration with, X, Y, and Z, right? So you have to do all you can to, it doesn't mean that other companies won't be able to get it, but you have to make it very hard for them to get that integration. And a lot is doing like working with the company where that integration is critical and making sure you're always advancing it. We had a situation once where a competitor wanted to just buy our integration. I was like, no way. They were willing to pay a lot for it. But that was my moat. That was my moat, right? And we're going to protect it at all costs because it took a long time to kind of get there, define it, and do it.
Right.
Okay.
And so it sounds like a big part of that moat is partnerships with other companies and using your personal relationship with those companies to kind of defend your space. Would you say that's true?
That's one way of, that's one way of doing it for sure. When you have good partners, they don't want to work with 20 vendors, right? They want to work with a partner that has strategic relevance to them. And I think you often see companies say, oh, we have a partnership with X, Y, and Z. When you dig 2 levels deeper, there's no shared revenue goal, right, for that. There's no shared objectives. It's just a press release partnership, right? If you really want to have a partnership, everyone has to kind of step up to the table and say, we're going to keep this partnership as long as we execute, 5 million in new shared opportunities.
Right. And so in forming those partnerships and developing that loyalty, but it's strategic, right? It's not an emotional, we just like you guys. It has to be you're bringing value to the table.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, don't forget, they're going to, even if it's a large company, they're going to put resources against it, right?
Right.
They don't like putting out resources that don't have, intrinsic value or more importantly, measurable value, right? So they can go at the end of the year, this partnership yielded us X, Y, and Z revenue. It gave us, these new clients,
Right. And so, go ahead, Gavin. Or you have a question about it?
No, you got it.
Okay. Yeah. I'm curious that you've talked a lot about the moats, selling to big companies, organizational structure, all these things that startups need to do. What are some of the biggest mistakes new founders are making when growing their companies?
Oh, they don't. For example, many of them go without having an idea of what the ROI for that company would be, right? That, at the end of the day, they may love and they can see what it could do, but you ultimately have to put on paper a provable, defendable ROI, whatever that, is. So, and that's also based on the pricing of your service or product to that. But you have to put an ROI on the table. ROI can mean different things to people. Obviously, revenue is key. But sometimes it's a customer service ROI, right? It's an improvement in your client satisfaction score. It's an improvement in your MQLs and if you're marketing, right? But you have to be able to link the solution to that value. And I think a lot of founders, I think you brought this point up earlier, guys, is that features and functions are just that. They're just features and functions. They, unless you can intrinsically link those to the value that will be achieved by using them, it's a lost cause. So I think it's one of the biggest mistakes is not understanding that value proposition in the context of what matters to the prospect.
Okay, yeah. I'm interested though too in sales from day one of starting the company. And I think it's worth it to obviously make that first sale as soon as you physically can, even if it's before you actually have the product in hand built. And so is that a mistake you often see founders make? Because I really do think that you need to validate that idea and get the cash in your hand as soon as you physically can. Because I'm reading this Noah Kagan book right now, and he was talking about how he spent $100,000 on getting this sports betting website up because somebody said that it sounded like a really good, or he or a bunch of people around him were saying that's a great idea, but he didn't have cash in his hand, and he spent all that money with a few friends, and long story short, nobody wanted to use any of the software that he spent $100,000 on. So if he was able to make that first sale before he was able to before he actually built that $100,000 software, I think it would have saved him so much time, right?
Well, I think there's a middle ground, right?
Okay.
You can't sell vaporware.
True.
At the same time, you can position early sales with techniques like pilots, right? Where the buyer understands that this is not the full thing you're doing, but we want to kind of test bed this with you, right? And then you have the opportunity through that time to enhance the product, right? I think it is in today's world, VC funding is much tighter than it has been in many years, right? Or even pre-seed funding. And there's a reason for that. It's because they want to de-risk and want to know that the company has an actual ability to generate revenues and grow profitably on their own. Investors tend to like putting monies into companies where most of it is going into go-to-market activities and not into product development activities, right? So you have to at least come to the table with an MVP, a minimum value product that you can bring to market and show, touch, feel, right? With the understanding that certain components won't be ready for 6 months, a year, but there is this huge change in people's mindset when they get the first deal. The whole company kind of changes, right? Like, oh my God, this is real. Because even when you're building it and doing this, you're probably telling, oh, this is going to be great. This is going to be great. This is going to be great. But it's not real, right? And so you have, like you say, you have a sports betting app that's just sitting on the shelf, right?
Yeah.
And I will just add this as a side note. Founders almost universally underestimate what it will cost to do a B2C product versus a B2B product. They underestimate the marketing necessary to establish a B2C product. And often B2C products also have the other issue is that if they're trying to offer you a new booking for travel, they don't have the inventory to be of interest, because if you open an app, you expect to have worldwide availability, right? It only works in right now. It only works for Windows machines, or it only works. There are things that you have to kind of think about in that perspective. But the other thing, it's almost universally true that B2C new businesses are underfunded in order to get the customer acquisition costs in B2C are so huge.
Yeah.
Right?
So you think that's one of the reasons why a lot of founders tend to head to the B2B market? I guess you're saying it's a lot more money to market for B2C. So I guess it's easier to bootstrap a B2B company in general.
Yes. Yes. Well, think about it. The marketing expenses alone for initial rollout of B2C product is in the millions.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you think that mistake of underestimating B2C marketing costs is because they're like it's a pride thing and they're just proud of their product, and if I build it, they will come? Or do you think they're in like
That's exactly right.
okay, is that
Okay, nice.
or
Now, there are instances, certainly like WhatsApp or something, right,
Sure.
where everyone wanted it, et cetera. But for the majority, it ain't like that.
right,
So I could probably rattle off a whole bunch of companies that are in the B2C space that you absolutely have never heard of, and I'm sure you can do the same for me. And that's even though it might be something I'd be interested, I've never heard of them, right?
Right.
So I think it's important. Now, the thing about B2B is you actually have normally in most verticals, you have industry events where you basically can meet all the buyers at once. There's your initial universe, right? You go to a fintech trade show, you go to a medical show, you go whatever it is. Your buyer universe is, you know them, you know who they are, where they sit, right?
right.
Yeah. And so you've had experience working with a lot of B2C and B2B, or what does that
Yeah.
look like for you? Both?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm working with one right now out of the UK. And the interesting thing, and I love the way they're handling the B2C issue, is working through what I would call their client partners to attract through their client base. So kind of B2B to C, where you got to get the benefit of the transactions, which is what people get really, hyped up about, got, 5 million users, but they're brought into the fold through the B2B relationship that you might have with, quote unquote, the distributor. It may be a hotel chain, it may be whatever. If you can get through it that way and still get the upside on the C side, that's pretty compelling way to go about it. The pure B2C, I typically have not worked with because face this exact same problem. And they get frustrated because they can't raise enough money to do it because and they won't get the money because it's not proven, right? That's typically this kind of circular issue.
Yeah.
And so improving it, does it need to be revenue? Will like a big following on social media suffice? Will sort of other factors?
I mean, I guess I'm old school on that, right? I mean, I
Sure.
can have 5 million downloads and no one does anything and then buy anything.
Right.
That's a pretty great. You have 5 million followers, but none of them are doing anything. Well, show me just the first $50 that came out of it.
Right.
Right. So yeah, I think they're important. They're incredibly important channels in today's world. Even the TikToks, all the digital streams and all that, incredibly important for in the age of B2C now. But you have to show conversion.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So you may say, okay, followers, what percent of that converts, and then what percent of that, that conversion becomes an actual sale, right?
Right.
You have to kind of think through that B2C funnel is kind of like this, right? It's really huge at the top and slims down, where a B2B funnel tends to be, more tight at the top.
And so if we could kind of bring a lot of what we talked about so far and sort of see it in use with one of your current startups, Tusmo, right? Could you maybe tell us a bit more about that company and sort of how you've used all these things you've talked about to help advise them and make it a great company?
With Tusmo, you mean?
Tusmo, yes, I apologize.
Yeah, so it's a really interesting company. And this is one of those B2B to C opportunities that can convert into ultimately a B2C play. So Tusmo was founded to bring cultural experiences to travelers by directly connecting them with local artisans and craftsmen on their journey. But at the same time, it serves as a platform for artisans to sell to interested parties. Now, what's the B2B thing is here, they are able to license a technology to luxury hotels, for example, and they will have a curated set of local artisans and craftsmen that the concierge can point their guests to, right? So now, what did you just do? You're taking the relationships that are already built with the concierge and bringing them that into that equation, and that's a much more efficient way. Like, how would you reach out? You don't even know that the guest is traveling. They would have to come to your thing and say, "I'm traveling here,"
Right.
right? If you didn't have that kind of intermediary, right? So using an intermediary that owns the relationship with the market you want is a great way to do it, and that's what we've been doing with Tuzma.
And I think there's probably a robustness to that structure where, like, when COVID hit, all travel stopped, but you could still be selling to the hotels they've already bought into the subscription. Whereas if you were selling directly B2C, that once in a lifetime event would have dropped you to zero, like, instantly.
Yeah, I mean, I took over the distribution company that I talked to you about earlier. I got my my offer letter in September 10th, 2001. And so the next day, revenues did exactly that. They dropped to zero, right?
Right.
And that was both and at that point we were a transactional business, getting a piece of every reservation, right? And so when the reservation stopped, we stopped. I think the beauty of SaaS is that you can get to a model where you have annual upfront payments, and that way you get your cash. But even if there's hiccups along the year, you have a steady, MRR, ARR going forward, and it protects you from. The most important thing that a CEO can have is predictable revenue,
Right.
because it is almost impossible to manage your business without predictable revenue, and it's harder to predict when you rely on B2C transactions, because you just don't know. No one's going to tell you what they're going to buy. But it's much more predictable if you have at least even if it's a hybrid, you have a base SaaS model that okay, I'm sure I can operate this is what I can operate the business with this. And if I get this, I can do these things, right? And so, but if all you do is have the other big problems is companies that rely on their clients' forecast for their forecast, right? So let's say you have a relationship with a company, and they say, "Oh, I'm going to do 50,000 transactions," and you're on the transactional side of the business, right? But if their transactions suddenly go to 30 because it's pay as you go, you've now built your forecast on someone says, "I'm going to do 50,000 transactions," and comes in at 30. Now what do you do?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you multiply that out. If you have to rely on the forecast of, say, 100 or 200 companies to do your own forecast,
Yeah.
yeah.
I guess it really is nice as a founder being able to have that SaaS model, that subscription model, because you know exactly how much you're getting, and when you have that better forecast, you could make better decisions as like hiring people or like finding what areas you need to get into, because you're gonna have that cash in 3 months from now,
Yeah.
And I think that's a really nice feeling to have as a founder.
Well, it is. I mean, I think, as you've probably seen, it's been difficult to raise money.
Yeah.
It's difficult to, and the old adage remains true. The best time to raise money is when you don't need it. But it's also true that, SaaS, SaaS revenues are a form of sometimes financing if you do upfront payments, right? So I'm going to give you this license for the next year. It's an upfront payment of X. Wow, that to me smells a lot like you're getting non-equity seed money. Right?
Yeah.
And so, you SaaS is like amazing as a founder. Do you think that's how like all startups are going to trend? Like I'm seeing even like physical books that you would buy are now being adopted into a SaaS model where you pay for the subscription, you don't have them on your shelves anymore. And I find that a little annoying because I want those books. But like, what's your prediction for the startup ecosystem as a whole?
Well, think about all your world around you. How many SaaS licenses do you have? Netflix? You got Netflix, right?
Sure.
You
Yeah,
got, all those, right?
along with
They're all
attending
around
rooms.
us.
Yeah.
Right, right. You have to be, you have to have, for example, the reason that online travel agencies are so successful in B2C is because their marketing budget can be 50 times that of a hotel company. All they spend is, that's their whole thing. If you think on TV, what commercials do you see when it relates to travel, right?
Mhm.
You don't see that many from
The
the
tech.
individual
Yeah.
suppliers, right? That's a marketing budget issue,
Right.
Yeah.
right? So that's why, and that's true in a lot of different cases, all over the place.
And sort of a last question here. Do you think with sort of all the new tools we're getting, all the AI, everything else, we're going to see a trend towards more like solopreneurs? Or do you think there's still a necessity for building a like sizable team at the start and co-founders working together to build a company?
Well, I'm a dinosaur in that regard. I think, I think there has to be a mothership. Even though we had offices all around the world, I required everyone to come back to the mothership once a year, right? I think it's important if you're trying to build a culture. I think it's harder to do in a remote or hybrid model. Now, if you want to be all remote, at least once a quarter, I'll get together at a hotel. Um, I mean,
Mhm.
it's funny. I was in a meeting a couple months ago, and two people in the other company had worked there for 5 years but had never met. Right
Yeah.
through the pandemic, they are not in person.
Right. Right.
You know, so again, I know the new thing is, well, we're going to be fully remote, we're going to be fully hybrid, etc. But I suspect that doesn't have as much value as create, the sense of team. And there's companies kind of leveraging that. I'm going to help you
Yeah.
build culture because you're all remote, right? Crazy, right? The CEO has to be the connective tissue that ties it all together.
Mhm.
And I can't imagine a world in which you live in that, for especially a startup company, that you've never, broken bread with the CEO. Right?
Right. Right.
Just weird. I mean, I remember a company that had, I think their CEO was in Boston. They had someone in South Africa. They had one in India. The virtual never shook hands.
Right. Yeah. In that case, I think we'll wrap up to the rapid fire round. Like
Oh God.
these are six.
No, you're gonna have fun, Greg.
It is a lot of fun. These are six questions we ask every guest. We say keep it under 30 seconds, but that's a very loose guideline. And the first one is, how much sleep do you get? You're doing a lot.
uh, I I get at least 7 hours of sleep a night, but I'm always up between 5 and 6.
Mm.
Nice. What's
Yeah.
your favorite book and why?
My favorite book. Um, I just read. I read one. My favorite book. Jesus, I read so much. Well, the recent one that I really like is called Imminent, and it is about the guy who started what the UFO, the UAP research within the government, and eventually the guy who brought it out into the public and got congressional funding for having this, and basically showing that there is life beyond our planet. And I thought the way he went about doing it and dedicating his whole life to bringing that to the forefront was an amazing, by the way, an amazing book when you think about how many relationships you have to build within a government organization to get something done. That part of the book just fascinated me. How to navigate the meeting, why certain meetings he wouldn't attend, why there's so much strategy in that people in business can learn from.
Awesome. What's your number one piece of advice for young people?
See the world. See the world. I've lived in Australia. I've lived in Holland. Um, you know, I traveled to so many countries I couldn't even name them, but see places you'd never go. Like my favorite place in the world is Cambodia, um, Southeast Asia. I mean, the history, going to Angkor Wat, seeing all that. See the world. Do not be contained behind the screen here or use that as your way of seeing something. Get on an airplane, go somewhere.
Yeah. What's most important to you in life?
Seeing more of the world. Uh, uh, Seriously. I mean, I'm 60 years old now, but I still have a passion for, seeing the world, and also just being present, right? Like the three of us right now, we're present, we're engaged with each other. If you can do that throughout the day, throughout your life, etc., it's going to be, I think, much more fulfilling.
Yeah, I think you're right.
If you could change anything about the world, what would it be?
About our world?
Change anything you
Sorry, I
want
didn't
about
get
the
to that.
world. Yeah, if you could change anything you want about the world, what would you change?
I mean, for me, it would just be to have peace. Just, if you think about what's going on, if we could change those things, it's interesting. I'm working with a venture capitalist who's Jewish, and I introduced him to a guy who's Arab, and the Arab founder, and the Arab guy said, "Well, I'm a little nervous. I didn't say it to the VC, but he's Jewish, I'm Arab." I said, "Well, personally, I've known the guy for a long time, and that's not going to be an issue." And then I had an opportunity to follow up with VC, and he said to me, "Absolutely no issue. This is how we make peace in the world."
I like
Right.
that.
So despite what's going on, there's, that's so key.
Mhm. And lastly, how do you want to be remembered?
Oh Lord, I want to still be known right now. Uh, but yeah, I mean, I guess I'd like to be remembered as someone who, um, helped, businesses, uh, achieve their goals. The guy who was, I have friends who I have had for 30, 40 years, right? That we all still get together every year, twice a year. So I kind of like to remember by the fact that being able to have such close, relationships for so long in my life.
Awesome. I think that's a fantastic place to leave off. And I mean, that's absolutely what you've been doing with Passkey, with Tuzma, with all the other companies you're advising and helping. Thank you so much for sharing your story and helping all those companies.
Thank you, BJ. Thank you, Gavin. Have a great day.
Of course.
Thanks, Greg. To our viewers who stayed
Ciao.
with us, we appreciate Greg being with us, and we will see you next week, Tuesday at noon. Don't be late. We'll see you then.